All right, so we've done, how many have we done? So this is the 8th MCU film that we're doing. So that means it's Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America, First Avenger, the Avengers, Iron Man 3, and then it's gonna be, oh, we're doing that one? We're doing Thor 2? All right. Before we continue, all right, let's get started. I'm Thor Odinson. Wow, such a bright world I've arrived into. I'm Thor Odinson, and my word, this world is much darker than the world I was in before. It seems as though I've stepped into Hello once again everybody, welcome to another episode of Eugene Reviews. This should be going out by Friday, so maybe around Wednesday or Thursday, both hurricanes Laura and Marco should be making landfall around the Gulf close to Louisiana and Texas. For those of you affected, hopefully everyone is safe, secure, healthy, and everything is kind of balanced and we can just weather out the storm, because 2020 has been one hell of a storm. Now, from one hell of a storm to another, today's episode we are going to be reviewing the 8th Marvel Cinematic Universe film in its lineup. And that film is the sequel, the second part of the 2011 smash hit Thor, known as Thor: The Dark World. Now, unlike the first Thor film, Thor: The Dark World came out in November of 2013. And if I recall correctly, I do remember watching this movie with a group of friends in college, possibly a Thursday night showing. It might have been a Thursday night showing at, I want to say it was an AMC or Regal. There were two of them that were relatively close, so we watched it there. So let's go ahead and hit the axe and let's go through Thor: The Dark World. Wait. All right, Act 1, development. Thor: The Dark World, take 1. So nothing too memorable or too newsworthy that you can recall for the development of Thor: The Dark World. The director of the first film, Kenneth Branagh, did not return for this, so it left the director's chair wide open for anyone else to take it. And you'd be surprised at the first two names that they got in consideration for it. One of the directors that was considered was a guy by the name of Brian Kirk. He is a notable director because he's directed notable series of television shows in his filmography, of the likes of The Tudors, Boardwalk Empire, and I believe an episode of Game of Thrones. And the other notable director that they got was a director by the name of Patty Jenkins. If you know Patty Jenkins, you will recall that she has directed films such as Monster, which got Charlize Theron her Academy Award win. And a few years later down the road, after Thor: The Dark World, she actually directed DC Comics' Wonder Woman. So she was at the helm of directing, but ultimately decided to withdraw from it due to creative differences. So could you imagine Patty Jenkins, who would go on to direct a wonderful film, no pun intended, could have been director of Thor: The Dark World? Woulda, coulda, shoulda. But anyways, they ultimately landed on director Alan Taylor. Alan Taylor is a more notable director in the television realm. Just like Brian Kirk, Alan Taylor has directed notable series such as Lost, Sex and the City, The Sopranos, Boardwalk Empire, and Game of Thrones. It should be noted too that because of his works in Game of Thrones, Alan Taylor was inspired by that in the production for Thor: The Dark World. And he was really inspired to make this film more Viking-like. And you will be able to tell from just the way Asgard looks, from the way the costume looks, that there were obvious inspirations from Viking-like traditions. But other than that, nothing otherworldly, noteworthy stuff that came with Thor 2. Just keep in mind they had Patty Jenkins at one point. It ultimately went to Alan Taylor to direct, and the film focused more so on being a Viking-like perspective, a Viking-like feel, and a more Viking-like feel altogether. So those are your development notes. Now let's go ahead and get to the meat of it, which is the story, which is the whole execution in Act 2. 2, execution. Thor: The Dark World, take 1. So Thor: The Dark World came out in November of 2013, and what can you say? I do like the layout of this film being kind of a blend of Star Wars mixed in with Game of Thrones, mixed in with Lord of the Rings. You can tell from the way Asgard looks and the way that both worlds kind of interchange, not only Earth, not only Asgard, but different worlds within the 9 realms, that there are some tie-ins and some type of homages to Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and Lord of the Rings. So overall, that feel, I think, was a nice touch to kind of really expand on the world of not just Asgard, but of Thor in general. Set pieces were exquisite. I love the costumes. I think that from a visual perspective, this film did look a little bit more better than the first Thor film. But other than that, I don't think there's anything strong to really put on this film. Overall, the film was good, like a soft good, borderline fair, fair good, good fair, depending on how you would see it. For me personally, I felt like the story felt a little dull, whereas the first film really dug deep in regards to the development of Thor, which was necessary, mind you. The second film tries to expand the relationship between Thor and Jane Foster. So while these battles are going on and the fate of the universe and humanity goes on, it feels like the general kind of storyline, I guess, for Thor 2 was the relationship between Jane and Thor, but it really wasn't intact and it wasn't as saturated as I thought it would be. The chemistry was a little off. I just really wasn't invested in it. It just felt like it was hollow all throughout. Now despite that, there were some good things to behold. Of course, the performances, not just from Chris Hemsworth as Thor, but Tom Hiddleston as Loki, played really well in this film. I think if anything, those were the most salvageable parts of the film, that even though you're stuck with a dull story and, dumb chemistry, this was probably, the saving grace of the entire film. You can depend on Tom Hiddleston, you can depend on Chris Hemsworth to give you the Thor and Loki camaraderie, friendship, betrayal, and just overall storyline. I do like that it started to kind of bring a sense of despair and humility and vulnerability to Thor, because you have to remember, Thor throughout this film, his girlfriend is infected with this ether. He's on the run in his own world. He lost his mother and he lost his brother. So you start to see this aspect of him losing and him really kind of being vulnerable and not being this mighty Thor. It starts with this film, and you can see it build throughout whenever you see Thor in future films, even into the next Thor film, which we'll see pretty soon. And then probably another meh thing about the film, the villain, Malekith?
Who?
I don't mind the actor, Christopher Eccleston. Yeah, Christopher Eccleston. I don't mind that actor. He's a good actor. I actually enjoyed him as a villain in both G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, and Gone in 60 Seconds. Splendid guy. But Malekith was so one-dimensional. I wasn't really truly invested in this. You just knew that this is someone that Thor was going to take out. It didn't feel like it was a feasible threat for this film. And maybe that's why it kind of dragged out and became a dull story, because you didn't really feel like this guy was threatening. You didn't feel like this guy was able to conquer the 9 realms. But despite that, and despite whatever misfires or hiccups that the film suffers, I do think this film is still good. The entertainment value in it is still there. You get good action, you get good humor, you get good spectacles, good effects, and it still ultimately feels like an adventurous Thor movie. So once again, overall, fair to good or good to fair. A meh story, and even more meh villain. The chemistry, it just felt like it wasn't there between Jane and Thor as the film goes throughout. A more vulnerable Thor was pretty nice and starts to kind of really expand on what Thor is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And yeah, just the overall vision of Asgard in this film was really splendid. The way I think it looks like Star Wars mixed with Game of Thrones mixed with Lord of the Rings, I think is a nice touch, and it makes it a little bit more of a visual treat compared to the first Thor film. Aesthetically, lighting wise, I think Thor 2 looks good compared to Thor 1. With that being said, let's go ahead and hit Act 3. Act 3. I'm already screwing up on the intros. Act 3, response. Thor: The Dark World, take 1. So when Thor: The Dark World was released to theaters worldwide, it garnered over $640+ million at the box office. It may not have put in numbers like Iron Man 3 did previously that year, but it still puts up good numbers as a film overall. They put in their ballots for Academy Awards for Best Visual Effects, but ultimately it didn't get in. It was nominated for other visual awards and other awards from different countries like Saturn Awards and whatnot, but I think all they got were nominations, there were no wins. If I'm not mistaken, to this day it holds a 66% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is the lowest score to date for any MCU film. And maybe because of that or other factors, in regards to the realm of MCU films, this might be labeled as one of the worst, or it's just not as memorable as the previous films or even future films. So yeah, good numbers at the box office, a lot of nominations, but only nominations, and kind of regarded as the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to MCU films. Really nothing too expansive to its reputation after, what, 7 years of it being released? So yeah, that pretty much sums up Act 3 for Thor: The Dark World. Not much said, so let's go ahead and wrap this up quick and let's hit the verdict on this movie. Thor: The Dark World is still a good film, but because it's in this nice little bubble known as the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you really have to exceed expectations. You really have to kind of surprise us with every film that you do, or at least be good enough to a point where it stands on your own 2 feet. For me, Thor: The Dark World felt like it kind of buckled underneath. It wasn't stable. It was enough to get me through almost 2 hours of watching a movie. I'm not saying Thor: The Dark World is a terrible film, but when you look at the previous 7 films that came out for the MCU, as well as the future films that we will see of MCU films, it's really kind of hard to see Thor: The Dark World one up these other films. It really is. But I do give credit where credit's due. Visually, this film is better than the first film. Thor and Loki always work. Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston just have that chemistry just locked in. The action's there, the visuals are there. I think that if anything, you can depend on Thor movies to really kind of deliver that. So overall, it's good for me. But when you kind of look at it in the eyes of an MCU film, you just think, it may be good, but it's not as good as Iron Man. It's not as good as Captain America: The First Avenger. Hell, it's not even as good as The Incredible Hulk. And that one kind of gets, pushed under the rug because it doesn't have Mark Ruffalo in it. It doesn't have current MCU characters other than Thunderbolt Ross. So yeah, it's just really kind of hard to see Thor: The Dark World one up any film, arguably, in the MCU. So with that being said, it's good. Other meh things, when you put it into a category such as the MCU, it's really hard to see this film just flourish over others. But if it stands alone as just a Thor film, no affiliations to the MCU whatsoever, I think it's still a good film nonetheless. So I'll go ahead and give Thor: The Dark World a 6 out of 10. Now, as you can tell by my somberness for this film, that you probably might guess where this ranks with the MCU. And it's not the alcohol, I'm telling you that right now. So Thor: The Dark World, I will put in between The Incredible Hulk and the bottom. So yeah, the bottom. Once again, for the record, I do not think this film nor any film in this list are terrible films overall. I just think if we're going to make rankings with the MCU, we really have to look and compare all of these films that we're reviewing previously and in the future, and really kind of come up with a judgment and say, is this better or is this worse than one or the other? And for me, I think that Thor: The Dark World isn't the strongest MCU entry. Therefore, it's going to be ranked last. But still, as a film, it's a good film. It's a good film. It's worthy enough. I don't mind watching this on a Saturday afternoon on cable television or on my Vudu account. But when it's seen in the lenses of an MCU canon, you can't help but notice that this is at the bottom rung of the MCU ladder. So there you have it, folks. That's Thor: The Dark World for you in a nutshell. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what y'all think about the film. Let me know if you have a different opinion about Thor: The Dark World. You may love Thor: The Dark World more than I. You may think that it's the best film of the entire MCU or of all films ever. And you know what? That's great. That's your opinion. And I acknowledge and respect and understand your opinion. So let's open it up for discussion without people hazing one another or talking about each other's mamas. Leave comments once again. Let me know about other MCU films. Let me know about other films in general you would like for me to review. Like, share, subscribe, follow me on Instagram at Eugene Reviews. And that pretty much sums up the episode right there. Once again, anyone in the Texas, Louisiana area, please stay dry, stay safe, weather out the storm, be prepared, you know, buy the supplies you need, look out for one another, and we will weather this impending storms, there's two, that has made landfall since this is going to be released on Friday. So hopefully everyone's safe from this. Hopefully everybody kind of finds time to, you know, kick back, relax. Hopefully you're relaxing and just enjoyed this video I had to put out for there. I hope I didn't make your day worse. In that case, I just made someone's day worse.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
So thank you once again for tuning in for another episode of Eugene Reviews. I am Eugene signing off. Until next week, we will continue with more movies to come. And that is a wrap. This might be labeled as one of the worst. Or it's just not as memorable as the previous films, or even future films.